I'm Calvin Robinson, and welcome to Defund the BBC. Joined with me today is the brilliant David Maddox. For those of you who aren't aware, David is the political editor of the Sunday Express and is the Daily Express leader. He also served time working on other publications such as The Scotsman, Aberdeen Evening Express, and Portsmouth News and Stratford Herald. David, thank you for joining us.
A pleasure.
The viewers who have read The Express will know how great a job they have done to take the BBC to task over its failures. In your experience of writing and publishing critical articles on the BBC, David, what has shocked you the most about the corporation's behaviour?
I think, I suppose the really big thing was the way they covered Brexit after the referendum, and the outright bias and unapologetic bias, really, towards the Remain camp. Even though, not just a referendum, election after election showed that there was a clear majority for leaving the EU. I thought more than anything else, it summed up the disconnect between this kind of West London or, Salford as well, kind of liberal elite, because Manchester weirdly has become a kind of little island of London, of that sort of London anyway. And the complete abandonment of, those kind of red wall areas and things like that, which actually they'd abandoned already. I mean, and they have no connection with the people who live in those areas. And in fact, that's why they were so surprised by the December 2019 election results, and when all their friends in the Labour Party suddenly started losing their seats, or almost losing their seats. So it's, I think that was the biggest thing, and the problem is that the BBC in many ways still makes a political weather because it is so dominant in the market, and that's
Yeah, I think you're right, and that disconnects there between the everyman and the metropolitan liberal elites. That's why Brexit took them by surprise. But we're seeing right now former BBC presenters and journalists such as Jeremy Clarkson and Andrew Neil have hit back at the BBC. Clarkson said that he doesn't trust the BBC News and he believes that they've completely lost it. And Andrew Neil said that he sees the BBC as metropolitan centre-left organisation. Do you think, with some of these former presenters weighing in on this, that people will start to wake up to the issue?
Well, I think people are waking up to the issue. We ran a poll in the Sunday Express a few weeks ago, which showed that more than 50% have woken up to the issue. They no longer trust the BBC News. They no longer trust the BBC as a corporation, and they don't think it's impartial. They don't think it's fair. They don't think it's balanced. And this has been a long time in the making. I mean, if you'd asked the same question even 5 years ago, there would have been an overwhelming majority saying the BBC was great. And it's also because they've gone back on their promise on the over 75s. License fee and forcing a lot of over 75s to pay that. And there's all sorts of reasons there. But I mean, for me, the big thing is that I genuinely believe that impartiality is one of the great lies of the British media market. It doesn't exist. What the BBC calls impartial is a very partial, narrowly defined centrist, admittedly left centrist maybe, but centrist view of the world, and it bears little relation to a lot of people's views on both the left and the right, actually.
Completely agree. We hear this a lot from people on the left and people on the right, that the BBC is completely biased, and that's because they have their own political agenda, don't they?
Absolutely.
And I think, new media ventures are being set up all the time, political news sites, YouTube channels, streaming platforms. If the BBC refuses to adapt and take part in serious reform before the next charter renewal, do you think the corporation will be digging its own grave?
I believe so. I think the political mood on the BBC has changed. I mean, you see it in the Conservative Party now, and it wouldn't surprise me if it moves to other parties as well. And but you certainly see it in the Conservative Party. But this is why the decriminalisation of the licence fees right up there on the agenda. I mean, it's shocking that over 100, mostly poor, economically poor women have gone to prison for not paying the licence fee in the last the last decade. I mean, it's stunning, that is, just because we're not helping pay people like Gary Lineker's massive salary. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. So actually, I do think, I mean, personally, I don't think decriminalisation will go nearly far enough. I think in the media market as it is now, the BBC is far too big. There's no excuse for a state-funded media presence anymore, a taxpayer-funded media presence, which is what it is. And if you look at its domination of radio, it has 51% of the radio audience, and that's that's a monopoly basically. And in my view, it needs to be broken up. We need to recognise that people are treating media differently. They're going for what they want. They're much more picky about things, and and go for it from there. And I suspect that's the trajectory of travel for the BBC, and it's certainly going to be coming through the Conservative Party soon, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to break down in that. But if we look at what's happening this week, the BBC's announced it's planning to splash out £15 million on hiring cars and minibuses for staff. According to the Times, that's an estimated £15 million value of a 7-year contract, which includes the BBC's projected total spend on renting vehicles, as well as a fee for the service provider. And the Taxpayers Alliance have come out and said, contracts like this perfectly illustrate why the TV tax isn't good value for money. It's not. And the BBC claims that it can't pay the TV license fees for over 75s at the same time as splashing out all this money on cars and hire cars. What do you make of this situation, David?
Well, it's just an example of a gross waste of taxpayers' money. I mean, we have to understand that the BBC is funded with a tax. I mean, the license fee gives it a slightly different sound to it. It is a tax. It's tax on every household that has a television. And I mean, the answer I've heard from some in the Labour Party is actually we should need to just change it to a tax on every household that has an internet link or something, which would be atrocious. I mean, and as such, the BBC should be held to account for why it spends money. And I mean, for me, every time the BBC salaries are announced, for its top presenters, I mean, it's a gross waste of taxpayers' money to spend over £1 million on an individual to present a football highlights programme. I mean, it's just, there's no excuse for that. And if they want to they always say that they've got to compete with the private sector. Well, if they want to be treated like the private sector, they want to pay salaries which are appropriate to the private sector, but are not coming from people's pockets through a forced tax, then they should be a private organisation. They shouldn't be dependent on public money at all, and that's it. I mean, literally the only thing I would give public money to is a World Service radio station, which I do think I have to say. I mean, maybe I have a slightly romantic view of it, as I used to work in Lithuania and Romania and Italy, and it was a lifeline for me. But it was. I do think it actually does a good job in projecting Britain and acting as a thing. But I mean, the rest of it, it's pretty shocking, and they seem to have no sense of control over how to spend their money at all.
It's fascinating what you just said as well about the Labour Party's solution to a tax is to introduce another tax. That's just for Labour all over, isn't it? So you've also authored a chapter on media reform and breaking the BBC for the Common Sense Group's new book, haven't you? Can you tell us what to expect from this new book?
So the Common Sense group of Conservative MPs, for those who don't know, is a group of around 60 MPs, mostly from the 2019 intake, but it was founded by a veteran of the parliamentary party, Sir John Hayes, who's a great Conservative voice. One of the few genuine ones actually in the ranks of the party in Parliament, and it was founded really to kind of take on the woke agenda, to take on the immigration debate properly, to take on law and order and justice issues properly, because in all these areas there was a feeling that really things had got far too liberal and far too soft, and I think we've seen with some of a reaction to the police and crime bill this week, just how hard people are willing to fight to prevent some tough justice and things like that. So the idea was for the Common Sense Group, it's been established for just over a year, and they wanted to put out a policy platform really to challenge Boris Johnson and the government to start thinking in more conservative, small c conservative ways. I mean, you know, it's shocking that the Conservative Party should be conservative, but it's, you know, put that aside for a moment. And so there's chapters on free speech, there's chapters on the cultural issues like statues and the way we fund arts and all sorts of things there. And Sir John asked me to co-author a chapter on media reform, and that takes on two angles essentially. If you're looking at areas for reform, it's broadcast, mostly the BBC, and of course the internet giants who have their own problems. I mean, it's a problem of corporates, I'm afraid, which is the big issue.
It sounds fantastic to me. So do send a copy. I'd love to review it at some point and see what it's all about. So some arguments for conservatism, the Conservative Party, who made my day, honestly. So the rise of smart TVs and other devices is challenging the prominence of the BBC and ITV and Channel 4. And it's now got to the point where the BBC is calling for legislation to ban the sale of plug-in devices, you know, such as the Amazon TV stick. This dictatorial means of trying to control the media is frankly quite disturbing. And I suppose you'd agree, David, is it not just, you know, all the British public want to see, especially as we're a nation that values free market and as well as startups and tech startups in particular? What do you think about this whole situation that's going on?
Well, the BBC has a long history of wanting to crush any competition and rivals. I mean, if you look at the way it spent its money in the last 20 years, so a great example is the creation of BBC 5 Live. That was a direct result of TalkSport starting up and the BBC deciding that, you know, a private sector company shouldn't control the market in one way or other. So they set up a taxpayer-funded rival to stop it from being a huge success, which is outrageous. You know, the creation of Sky News as a 24/7 news channel. What did the BBC do? They spent taxpayers' money on creating a rival to that, and it's I'm not a great fan of Sky News, but I'm certainly more of a fan of Sky News than I am of the BBC version of it, which is pretty woeful as far as I can see. But it's this is just a natural progression. So if you can't outspend them and outdo them on just by using taxpayers' money, then the next step is to try and ban your rivals, which are, you know, I mean, going back to the social media giants, they behaved in exactly the same way. If you look at what happened to Parler, there was a clear connivance there between Twitter, Facebook, and Amazon to ensure that rival to Twitter was taken out of the market. And the BBC behaves in a similar fashion. The only excuse you can give to the social media giants is that they are at least private companies doing their thing. You know, the BBC is doing this with taxpayers' money, and you know, in the end, they don't want choice. They don't want people to be able to go for what they want. They don't like the fact that you regularly see BBC employees attacking Netflix and Amazon Prime and Disney Plus and things like that. But you know, the fact is that these organisations, these companies are providing things that people want, and certainly the same with smart TV. I mean, I can see a world in 10 years' time where, you know, there's all sorts of micro news channels going on. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the newspapers go that way as well, and people start choosing those things, which is another reason I would get rid of the impartiality nonsense, because it frees up the market to do exactly that. Certainly, that was something I addressed in the chapter. The great cable television revolution in the 80s in America was when Ronald Reagan and Republicans effectively ditched the version of impartiality. I think it's the Fairness Act or something like that. And and that's what we need in this country.
I agree. And I think Ofcom came out last week and said, the impartiality guidance is open for interpretation, which does leave, that's quite promising for new channels like GB News, and let's see what comes from that. But David, Maddox, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on Defund the BBC, and you've hit so many nails on the head today.